All right. So I will be talking a little bit about accelerating flow with team topologies and friends. So what does this mean essentially? That, and I was just talking about this earlier today. I see team topologies often works as a kind of entry point. Obviously, it has been quite successful since the book came out 3 years ago, more than 3 years ago. But in reality, for I think any organization, I would say any size, but obviously larger organizations even more, even if you start looking at team topologies as a way to improve how you organized, how teams interact, you end up needing other pieces, right? If you haven't thought about your kind of business domains long enough to understand, how do we align teams to the business domains? We cannot do that if we don't know what the domains are, or what is our strategy based on the life cycle of the products that we offer, right? Do we need more platform type of teams or more stream type of teams? A lot of questions can come up as we even if we're trying to adopt the ideas in team topologies. So I see it a bit like that. It's not team topologies, not the objective in itself. Is just one more kind of tool that we need. And it's nice to see that more and more people are talking about sort of the combination of team topologies with other approaches. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and obviously also why team topologies helps with things like accelerating flow, business agility, and what does that mean. So for me, very briefly, the book, I quite like this sort of definition that Charles Betts mentioned, is a set of tools, concepts, also constraints that we should be aware of to structure our operating model in a way that's a good fit for our challenges as an organization, or the kind of things we're trying to achieve from a business perspective. So I think that's a good way to describe the book. There's also published last year a remote team interactions workbook, which is much smaller, and is also more practical in terms of providing some templates, some simple techniques of how do we actually apply some of the ideas of team topologies on a day-to-day basis, especially in the remote environment, which most of us are in remote or hybrid working environment. And yeah, I like this definition from Stefan at Red Hat. That was our point, to extend the original book with valuable exercises to set up your teams effectively. But so to talk today, I'm going to briefly tell you what is my or our definition of business agility, because there's many definitions as people that you ask about. And then what we're talking about in terms of being agile. I'm sure that's not new to you, so I'm not going to be giving any kind of classic definitions of agile, just kind of setting the context of what I'm talking about when we present the ideas of team topologies and other approaches that can help us with achieving more agility. And then a little bit about product mindset, why that's important, and finish with an example, an actual real implementation of some of the ideas of team topologies. So let's get started then. What is business agility for us? Is the ability to respond rapidly to changing internal and external conditions. And the asterisk there is important because we're talking ideally in hours, meaning if we have a request from a customer, or it could be an issue that we need to fix, or it could be an idea, a new idea, could we understand this need, implement, and get the change? Obviously, it has to be a small change, but could we get it to the customers in a matter of hours? That maybe is sort of the epitome of business agility, right? And again, there are many other definitions. I think this is good because it helps us think about, it's good because we understand how this is helpful if we can do this. And it also gives us an idea that there's probably a lot that needs to happen in the organization to achieve this kind of agility. Obviously, from a technical side, from organizational side, and from a business understanding side as well. And we need business agility for many reasons. Among them, we are working more and more remotely, right? So we need to be agile to respond to change, the changes in technology, and even circumstances that impact the organization, climate, geopolitical circumstances. We need to be able to adapt quickly to these changes, right? And obviously, there's more and more competition in almost every industry. The sort of barrier to entry is becoming lower and lower. You look at fintech, you look at also startups in healthcare as well. Things that used to be very difficult to enter due to regulations or to the expertise that you needed are changing quite fast. So what we should be looking at is what questions can we answer with this focus on business agility, focus on the fast flow of value to customers. We want to know, how do we optimize for this fast flow of change, right? We want to know, how do we make sure we're focusing on user needs, and how do we easily or quickly course correct when we're sort of going in the wrong direction, or we need to fix our approach. If we keep these questions in mind as we decide on organizational changes or new practices that we want to adopt, that we think we should adopt, these questions help us keep in mind, is this actually helping improve business agility? Is this new practice or this new way of organizing help us achieve faster flow of change, focus on user needs, more, have a better focus, or course correct faster? I think fast flow is a prerequisite for business agility. It's not the only one. It's one of the prerequisites, at least in the context of definition that are provided, right? That we can act upon changes that are needed or fixes to problems in a matter of hours. We're going to need ways to deliver change and to provide and validate that we're actually fixing the problem or solving a customer need quickly. And obviously agility in a broader sense, and in the sense of agile methodologies and practices, is needed as well. But we need it in a way that we're being agile and not just doing agile. So we need to go beyond the ceremonies and understand, okay, how do we know if we're going the right direction, right? It's not because we're doing all the retrospectives, all the planning, estimating, whatever framework or methodology is being followed. It's not because we're doing all the ceremonies that we're necessarily getting to more business agility, getting to faster flow of value, right? It might be that those things are aligned, but it's not necessarily the case. And while I don't want to go into a debate about specific frameworks, I'm happy to answer questions at the end about that, but it's not the point of the talk. It's important to keep this in mind. So what actually can help us sense if the teams and the organization is let's say moving towards more business agility? And we have the book Accelerate from 2018, which provided some pretty good evidence based on data. So this book was sort of the result of multiple years of surveys around which practices helped teams become more performant, and are those practices and ways of working related to high performing organizations and better business outcomes. So this book actually provides already a lot of the foundations to understand, are we getting to more business agility? And there are 4 key metrics in the Accelerate book. Maybe you've all heard about them by now, but just to remember: lead time, deployment frequency, mean time to restore, and change fail percentage have been shown to correlate with high performing teams and better business outcomes for hundreds, if not thousands, of organizations. And so these are, again, the end goal is not to just improve these metrics, but when we look at these metrics as a whole, and we can look at it at the team level, as well as kind of at the system or service level, it kind of helps us see if we're improving, if the trend is kind of in the right direction around these metrics, then we're probably getting closer to having that kind of business agility that I was talking about, right? If we're having shorter lead time, we can deploy more frequently, we can restore problems in production faster, and we have less quality issues when we do our deployments, we're probably in the right direction. It's not to take the metrics and say that we're good or we're bad. It's just, are we trending? Are we going in the right direction? I think that's the most important, in my opinion. And so the book Accelerate also talks a lot about practices, technical practices that are going to help us improve these metrics, and cultural changes as well. Obviously, highly recommended if you haven't read it yet. So some of the things that we need to have in place, more on kind of on the technical side, obviously we need to have good deployment pipelines that provide fast feedback, right? So we need to know, we want to know as quickly as possible when we're trying to get a change to the customers. Is there a problem with some regression, some tests that failed, or the performance is degrading with this new change, or whatever it is? We want to know as soon as possible. So we need to have a good kind of infrastructure around the deployment pipelines. They're sort of the backbone to allow us to have fast change. Obviously, when I talk about fast change and delivering value quickly, I'm not talking about logging into your production system and copy paste files, right? That's not secure or reliable or any of those things. So we're talking about fast flow of change in a sustainable, secure way. We need good technical practices from, ideally test-driven development. We need probably to do pair programming. We need to have good telemetry, monitoring, observability. A lot of these things should be in place, so we should be looking to improve those practices. Absolutely. The basic things: configuration and version control. You'd be surprised or not that many organizations still don't do that. Kind of the basics, and then improving our technical capabilities, right? We are in a technical field. We need to, if our products are based on software, we need to be able to manage and change that software very quickly, and we need technical practices around that. Cloud native as well helps us with a lot of the operability and observability issues, right? Being able to quickly recover from problems, quickly scale when there's peak in demand, etc. Cloud native is by its nature designed for automation, which is going to allow us to do things faster with less manual work. All these things, I imagine, is fairly known to you, right? I'm not telling you anything new. We live in this age of, we need continuous everything, basically continuous integration, testing, security scanning, monitoring, deployment, etc. Right? I would say we need also continuous organizational evolution, but I'll get to that in a moment. What's interesting is then looking at not just technical practices, but what else do we need? And I don't know if you've saw this State of DevOps report that came out a couple of years ago from Puppet Labs, where they actually asked questions to hundreds of organizations about interactions between teams, and did they have clarity on which types of teams exist, how do they relate to each other, and they were trying to figure if there's correlation between these aspects and high performance. And so one of the things they found is that basically these days organizations should not expect to be more high performing or highly evolved, as they said, just because using cloud and automation. Basically, those things are sort of table stakes now. They're kind of the baseline that we need to have if we even want to compete with others. We need to have those kind of technical approaches and automation where it makes sense. But the low performers typically are held back by organizational structure and dynamics. So issues around how do we improve the way we interact to be more effective, to be more performing, what kind of dynamics should be in place so that we are improving those aspects of the work. And so some of the things we need to be looking at if we want business agility, besides technical agility, is things like teams having ownership of software and services, which means we need to have, or we should be aiming, again, it's an ongoing journey. It's not that we are just going to do a big reorg and everything is better, but we need to have teams kind of moving away from thinking of themselves as development teams that just take a backlog that someone else creates for them and just go implement and put it into the live system, and that's it. That's one part, right? But you need to have teams with more end-to-end ownership of the services, so they understand the actual users. They understand that features should not be sort of immutable. Features should be our means to understand if we can meet the customer needs, if we can fix a problem the customer has, or help them do some work in a more efficient way, right? And so the features we implement might help or they might not help. So we need teams to be much more aware of this kind of things around how do we do product development, how do we understand the users, etc. Again, it's a journey. I would say I've not seen an organization where I would look at the teams and say, oh yes, they're really stream-aligned teams, as we talk about in the book. They typically, it's a spectrum where some teams have gained more responsibility, more ownership over time, but it's a journey. And when we want to achieve this, because we know that helps with faster flow of change, because teams have more ownership of the services, typically we need to rethink or I would say realign or refocus our architecture, right? So there's something called Conways Law, which says the architecture of our systems is going to reflect the structures and communication between teams, right? So if we want teams with more end-to-end ownership of their services that can act upon them faster, the architecture needs to reflect that. We need architectures for fast flow, basically, where you have more independent services that can be owned by independent teams. If that's what we want, if we want faster flow, if we want more kind of business agility. And then we need other approaches, like I was saying in the beginning. Things like domain-driven design can help us sort of untangle business concepts for faster flow. So domain-driven design, it seems a bit daunting at first because there's a lot in the original domain-driven design book. But over the years, several people like Nick Tune and Suzanne Kaiser and other people have been sort of distilling that sort of complicated approach, if you like, at first sight, into techniques and things that are simpler and help us, especially the people from business side, understand why do we need to have better clarity on what really are our business domains, what we offer to our customers. Because when we talk about monoliths, in my mind, it's often not really a technical problem. Yes, partially, but it starts with the fact that we have tangled up a lot of different business concepts or offerings in the same system, right? And that's where it becomes difficult to change them quickly if everything is sort of coupled together. So domain-driven design is very helpful with that. Wordly Maps is another Team Topologies friend, between quotes, more on the kind of strategic side, helps increase situational awareness. So understanding the context in which we operate. So what is the kind of environment around us? What is the competition? Where do our offerings stand in kind of this landscape? And then apply the right techniques based on, are we providing stuff that is an utility or a product or something that is an innovation, something custom that we don't know yet if it's going to become a product. So I would say there's a lot to Wordly Maps, but essentially it can help us figure out where our offerings or products are in the life cycle, and therefore, do we need more kind of platform teams? If it's more of an utility, do we need to sort of platformize a lot of the stuff that we provide? Do we need, or is it something more custom on the other side, that we need to have more streamlined teams, and we need to expect that they're going to have to do a lot of discovery around what is really going to become a product that helps customers and provides benefit to the company. I'm summarizing this in 1 minute, but there's a lot to it. And again, there are people besides Simon Wardley who wrote the book. It's available free online, but there are people who have been helping kind of distill all that's in that book into kind of easier ways to get started, essentially. Another important approach, I think, complements Team Topologies quite well, or they go together quite well, is dynamic reteaming. So there's a book from Heidi Huffland that is called Dynamic Reteaming. Because often we might, like I said, start with Team Topologies and realize, well, we need to make changes to teams, or we need to introduce new teams, or we need to realign teams with the new kind of business domains or lines of business that we want to focus on. Then how can we make those changes to teams in a sort of humane and socially minded way, right? I think that's where dynamic reteaming is one of the things that is quite strong. Is here are some proven patterns to do that. So don't just go and make all sorts of changes to teams without realizing what the impact is on the individuals and the performance as well of those teams, right? So setting the right expectations and having some useful patterns to follow as well. And obviously, Team Topologies focus on fast flow, getting rapid feedback, team interactions, evolving the organization, etc., focusing on team cognitive load. But there are two main ideas of Team Topologies, kind of the underlying goals of Team Topologies to achieve a rapid flow of change, but change that is valuable to customer, right? Like I was saying before, it's not just deploying more features faster, because we might be doing totally the wrong thing for the customer. Is we need to have a rapid flow of change, being able to deliver change quickly, because we need to then get rapid feedback and check if this change is actually meeting the user needs or the business goals or both of them at the same time, right? So it's this cycle of we're able to do things quickly, change things quickly, and then get quickly feedback from the actual systems to understand if we're helping or not. And obviously, we should be getting feedback ideally directly from customers as well when possible. The thing is, the problem is when we have a lot of handovers in our life cycle, then these two things become much slower. We cannot make changes quickly, and we cannot get rapid feedback if we have this kind of approach. And obviously here it looks very waterfallish, but if you think about the life cycle in your own organization, you might realize, yes, often there are handovers between teams, right? It might not be exactly these ones, but well, maybe we have a team that checks for compliance, or we have a team that needs to change some infrastructure, or whatever it is that requires handovers of work between different teams, is what's going to slow us down considerably most of the time, and where feedback loops become more difficult, slower, where we lose information because of the handovers. And so the sort of the ideal that we would like to have, as we describe in Team Topologies, is this idea of streamlined teams that have end-to-end ownership of some stream or service, something that has value to the customer and to the organization. So it might be an actual service, it might be part of a larger product where maybe it's a set of functionalities, maybe it's a customer journey that's fairly independent from other customer journeys. The stream can be anything that we should have end-to-end ownership by the team, right? So that means we understand the customers, we are able to make changes quickly and validate if this change is helping the customer and the business. This is the ideal. Like I said earlier, it's not that I haven't seen a lot of examples where this is actually the case, but it might be a good goal for us to improve our flow, to improve business agility, is to have more of these teams and to have our current teams go in this direction, where we're going to need to acquire some new skills. We need to have more responsibilities perhaps than we had in the past as a development team or as an application team or what have you. But we understand why, what is the value of that. And then come the other types of teams that we talk about in the book, which effectively exist because this kind of streamlined team is difficult to achieve. It requires a lot of capabilities because basically we're saying you become the owners of the life cycle, of the entire life cycle for this service or part of a product, right? You shouldn't depend on, well, let's say ideally you don't depend on any other team to be able to take a change or request from a customer, make the change and put it into production, and then get the feedback from there. And that means this might lead to a high cognitive load for this type of streamlined team. There's a lot we're going to need to understand from a capability perspective, from tooling perspective, from a skills perspective, right? And so we need other types of teams to help balance this high cognitive load. So it's kind of a two-factor approach, if you like, is on one hand, we're trying to get teams with more end-to-end ownership. On the other hand, that's going to increase their cognitive load to a level that is not sustainable. So we need to lower their cognitive load with the help of other teams. And so very briefly, these teams include platform teams that you see here at the bottom, which provide good abstractions for kind of, it can be technical services or other kind of services that streamlined teams are going to need around the lifecycle, easy ways to do monitoring, easy ways to do deployment, testing, etc. So they provide a lot of kind of the backbone to allow streamlined teams to be the owners, but have help in terms of the kind of the technical details, in the sense that they're kind of things that we can abstract. Obviously, there's a lot to that as well inside the platform. And then we have enabling teams, which essentially are small teams, usually of experts in some domain or some capability that we want to get the streamlined teams to improve or to acquire, right? Again, thinking about this journey of the teams from kind of maybe development teams in the past to streamlined teams, well, we're going to need to learn about operation sides. We need to learn about how do we look at the observability, site reliability, these kind of aspects. We're also going to need to learn more about product development. How do we understand the users? How do we do user experience focus? This all sorts of things. And so if teams don't have those capabilities, we should have enabling teams to help them. So the enabling team works directly with the streamlined team. They might be pairing on examples, or they might be doing some more kind of classical training or workshops, but they understand what the streamlined teams need, right? It's not a sort of blanket training. Okay, everyone gets training on UX, and suddenly we expect them to be able to do the work of UX experts. It doesn't work like that. That's not how people learn. They need kind of small steps: learn, apply, learn, apply, and that means the enabling teams sort of orbit around the streamline teams. And finally, complicated subsystem teams are sort of a bit of an exception, especially when we have some algorithms, for example, that are very complicated, or we have some really old technology that we cannot ask the streamline team to be responsible for that and the rest of the service, right? So it's essentially something we need on the rare occasion where we actually need a whole team dedicated to being responsible for the subsystem, which, like I said, can be an algorithm, can be an actual running service, or can be more of a library. But the complicated subsystem team needs to understand that they have a client, or they have multiple clients, which are the streamline teams using that subsystem, right? So even there, we need a different mindset than we've seen in the past with component teams and things like that. But then it's not just about the types of teams, it's about how they interact, right? There's a quote from Russell Ackoff, who was a systems thinker, and where he was saying it's problems in a system are typically not because any one part malfunctions, it's because of how the interactions and how they interrelate the different parts of the system, breaks down or is not working correctly. So I think, if I may, that sort of one of the breakthroughs with team topologies, I would say more than the team types, is actually having clearly defined interactions between teams. At least I never worked in an organization where people would say, well, what kind of interaction do we need to have and why? And how long should it take, right? And that's what we try to provide with this, because we saw that in our experience, there are three fundamental types of interactions between teams. There's collaboration, where two teams are working together to solve a common problem, or they're working together to maybe remove some dependency they have between them. That would be a good reason for collaboration. But it's much more intentional and well-defined than just kind of open-ended collaboration. It's actually, okay, how long is this going to last? What is the purpose? When do we know we're going to be done with this collaboration? Because it actually also costs more to collaborate than each team working on their own kind of service, right? We need to understand the other team. We need to understand what are we trying to solve. And so collaboration is actually kind of expensive if you look at it in that way. And then on the right side, we have facilitating. This is when two teams are interacting, and essentially you have one team that is more knowledgeable or more experienced in some domain. Again, any of the things I mentioned before could be examples, whether that's how do we do good product development, how do we do observability. It can be anything where one team maybe is kind of a bit behind, and so the other team that's more experienced is going to help them learn in a faster way with sort of a curation of the knowledge that the team needs, right? So it's much more effective than just saying, well, here are some helpful guidelines and maybe some training, go on and learn by yourself and apply the learning. If you have facilitating by another team, is actually much more efficient. Obviously, this is the typical interaction mode for enabling teams, but it could happen between two streamline teams. For example, one team is sort of a pioneer and has experienced a lot more with microservices, and another team is trying to move to microservices, then that would be a good interaction to have, right? Let the more experienced team sort of guide the more junior team in that domain, understand what are the pitfalls, what are the things you need to be careful or consider, and so the organization as a whole becomes more effective. And the third interaction mode in the middle is X as a service, which is taken from the ideas of infrastructure as a service, for example, where you have one provider and other teams consuming a certain service. It's basically applying this idea internally in the organization. But it means the service needs to be really well designed and fit for what the teams need, right? It's not the old school, well, we have some shared services, so just everyone use this shared service. Okay, but often that shared service had a really poor interface, or very hard to understand, or was badly documented because there was no incentive to make it actually really usable and developer friendly or engineering friendly. And so that's why the interaction mode is there, is to say, okay, you might not need to actually communicate between teams if you have access to service, but you need to make sure the service is really fit for purpose, it's easy to understand, it's reliable, etc. So the team types and interaction modes are sort of building blocks for us to then think about, okay, where are we? And we can start having these kind of visualizations, which again are just to have good conversations, the right conversations. Not that we design the perfect model and that's, once we get there, we're fine. This is a continuous evolution that we need to have. And we might say, well, we're trying to move towards streamlined teams, and so they need help from an enabling team, and maybe they use some complicated subsystem that another team is responsible for, and they use some sort of platform services. It gives us a snapshot of what's happening today, and what do we need to do next? Okay, are we going to need another kind of enabling team? Are we going to need some collaboration to create some new platform service because what we have today is not enough, or whatever it might be? But it's a tool to help us have those conversations. And going back to the State of DevOps report, again, I recommend having a look at it. They found that highly evolved companies, firms, use a combination of streamlined teams and platform teams as the most effective way to manage team cognitive load at scale. And I would add that they need the enabling teams as well, often, right? But essentially, what I was saying before, like streamlined teams, if they really have end-to-end ownership of the service, they're going to typically have high cognitive load because there's a lot of skills and capabilities they're going to need. And so the other types of teams are going to help manage this effectively. And what we're doing is sort of moving, let's say, distractions from streamlined teams, things that are really not their core business, into platform. And so those things are the business of the platform teams, but they are not the business of streamlined teams. Things like how do we do the monitoring? How do we do the observability? How do we do deployments? And lots of other things. How do we do infrastructure provisioning? It is still the streamlined teams that are the owners. They are the ones who need to do it and take responsibility. But if they have a good platform that provides easy ways to do those things, that's where we get to this sort of effectiveness that the report is talking about. We need also some sort of shifts in typically the mindsets in many organizations, especially traditional organizations. But even sometimes you see this in more kind of startup or scale up. So I'm going to talk about some of those kind of mindset shifts. One of the things we need is to move away from blocking dependencies to non-blocking. So we need to start tracking at least the dependencies, and then figuring out what and how do we need to change, right? So in this visualization, the blocking dependency means a team is working on some change that they want to get to the customer, but then they are blocked because now we have to wait for another team to do something for us. Maybe it's some change in infrastructure, or maybe We still have a testing team that needs to do the testing for us. And so we have to stop and wait, right? That's a blocking dependency versus having a sort of, like I said, platform approach where we might need help. We might need certain ways to make our life easier, whether that's, ways to simplify testing, deploying, monitoring, etc., but in a self-service way, right? In a non-blocking way. So that's what you see here at the bottom, where the team might say, well, we need to change the infrastructure. Here's a service or some API that we can call and make that change ourselves, right? But the API or whatever is underneath makes sure the change is secure, it's done in a proper way. So this is a much more effective approach to making changes. In general, we need to remove barriers to fast flow, whether that's handoffs, approvals, manual inspections, etc. So we need to be looking at this idea of, okay, how can we turn this into a non-blocking dependency? Often that's with self-service APIs, but it can be other things, self-service checklists, or things that don't need to always be sort of actual running software, but ways that the teams, Streamline teams, can self sufficiently do and check. So this requires a mindset shift around compliance, right? From being the people who control and allow certain things to happen or certain changes to go through, to actually enable the teams to self-check those changes, right? Self-check that we're still compliant, self-check that what we're doing is secure, etc. So this is actually difficult. I would say it's one of the areas that's more difficult to get people with this traditional compliance mindset, in that, well, we have controls and checks in place to make sure we are always compliant, to kind of, okay, you need to enable other teams to do that by themselves. In terms of the topologies, this might translate between codes into something like this, where we might need some APIs in some kind of platform. There are a lot of people talking, well, I would say maybe not a lot of people, but some people talking about compliance as code. But some sort of kind of self-service approach that allows teams to check for compliance. But you also need enabling teams, because compliance, governance are complicated areas that need knowledge, need teams to gain awareness, to gain understanding of this. And so you need to have enabling teams as well, right? It's not just providing the platform services, actually helping teams understand how to use them and why they are needed. There are some really cool examples at the time of the GDPR several years ago. Actually, some organizations sort of took this approach where they had teams of legal experts explaining and helping the development teams understand what is the implication of this new data privacy regulation in terms of how we store data, how we retrieve data, and all these other kind of aspects. So I'll try to go a bit faster, so we don't have a lot of time. There's also the importance of having a product mindset, right? I already mentioned that a little bit, that the Streamline teams need to understand their customers, right? The products have customers. I like the definition of product from Marty Kagan. That a good product is not just functionality, it's also the design, the monetization, content. But we can go a bit deeper than this and try to figure out, okay, what actually makes a product? Well, one thing is that a product is optional to use, right? If you go to a sneaker store, you don't have to buy anything. You might buy it if you like it, if you think it's what you need. But it's a product's optional to use, right? No one is forced to use the product. So this is quite important for any team to understand. We also need the product to be designed for the purpose, right? To be a good fit for what the customer is trying to do. So being carefully designed and curated effectively. We need products to simplify workflows or simplify some task that the customer or the users need to do, right? So a product simplifies something for users. That's another characteristic typically of a good product. We need products to take advantage of technology, right? If we're stuck with technology from 10 years ago, or maybe even 5 years ago, we just quickly, we quickly become unable to compete with our competition, because technology helps us also improve our products, right? We need to take advantage of that. And effectively, we need a strong focus on the user needs to create good products, in particular, good software, right? We need the good user experience is a key differentiator of a good product than just, a set of features. And the software, in a way, should help, or the software itself should get out of the way of the user, right? The simpler we make it, the more usable we make it, then the better the product. So one important mindset shift as well for fast flow and for business agility is for those internal platforms I was talking about to have a focus on product, to think of themselves as a product, even though it's consumed internally and not by our end customers, right? So we can effectively apply the same ideas to internal platforms. A platform should be optional to use as much as possible. No team should be forced to use the platform, because then we have the wrong incentives. The platform just becomes some shared services that we are mandating everyone to use. And we don't really need to care about the experience of using the platform. Does it actually help teams go faster, or is making them go slower? Which means we need platforms to advocate for their own platform product and sort of market, between quotes, to internal teams, right? It doesn't mean that platform teams need now to spend all their time promoting their platform, but they need to do a bit of that type of work for sure, to get the engagement and adoption of the platform, right? The thing we realized after writing the book, so this is not in the book, but platform essentially is a curated experience for engineers. If we're talking about engineering platforms, it could be a curated experience for any kind of internal users, right? If it's not just an engineering platform, whoever the customers of the platform are. But this way of thinking about the platform means we focus on, like I said, we need to do a bit of marketing. We need to show the value of the platform. We need to help people on board. We need to make sure the documentation is up, is of good quality. We need to make sure we are available to help teams that have problems using the service, and so on. So it's a pretty different approach or mindset from, well, we have a platform. Sure, it's a set of shared services that everyone has to use. You don't get the incentives to do any of these things I mentioned. And I want to close with an example. We actually have multiple case studies available on our website. There are the case studies from the book, obviously. Those case studies that you find in the book were showing specific patterns being applied in organizations like Adidas, IBM, and others. But now we have, if you're interested, industry examples of applying team topologies more kind of holistically. Again, with the understanding that team topology is not the end goal, is another tool in your tool belt that's going to help you get to more business agility and faster flow of value to customers. So some of these examples, you can see the companies here, but yeah, I suggest having a look at the website. They cover different ideas from the book that were applied in these different organizations. So I want to talk very briefly about one of these, which is Food Asylum. Is actually a growing, they already have probably more than this by now, 70 stores in the UK. They sell sportswear, and the interesting thing, they've always been kind of focused on the digital experience. If you think about companies like Adidas, for example, they used to be frank, not care too much about their software. Everything was outsourced, but then some years ago they changed, and now I think at least 50% of Adidas revenue is coming from digital channels. Anyway, Foot Asylum obviously is much smaller, but they always had this digital first mindset. But the way they were organized led to high fragmentation of the work and the focus. So very briefly, they used to have a team of product managers in the UK, and then they had some development teams across the world, also in the UK, but also in Romania. In India, you can see from the names of the teams even that it's not very clear. Are these teams organized by function, development function, or they're organized by functionality in the checkout team, or they're organized by R&D? Was pretty confusing. And basically the product managers were running around trying to basically coordinate projects and features and see, well, this needs team A to make this change and team B to make that change. There was no stream alignment. There was no end-to-end ownership of services. And so this was in 2019. And then when they saw the book, when they read the book, they started applying some of these ideas. Actually, I think they even saw some of our talks before the book came out. And they got to a much improved for them organization, just getting teams to actually have a clear responsibility, right? At least you have the e-commerce team, retail team, customer experience. I wouldn't say it's perfect, but at least you start to see how they're moving away from functional oriented teams or that sort of confusing area to, okay, now this looks a bit more aligned to business areas, business domains. They said that product managers especially found very helpful the team interaction types that I talked about. So collaboration, facilitating, access as a service, because they could fact check the different roadmaps, make sure the interactions that are going to be needed between teams were lined up in advance. So for the product managers, it was actually quite helpful. Again, in a journey, right? It's not that, well, they were now doing full team topologies, if that exists, but effectively using the team interactions helped make a lot of things clear and facilitate, simplify the roadmap and understand, okay, to do this, we're going to need these teams to interact, to collaborate, or we're going to need some teams to facilitate others, etc. Another thing they did was to move away from services focus team, basically shared services, to a platform focus, and the platform as a product focus especially, right? So again, making sure we're understanding the needs of the stream-aligned teams, and then providing adequate services with the right usability, reliability, etc. Something else that they took from the book was the idea of a thinnest viable platform. So we're not trying to build this mammoth platform that does all sorts of things. We're trying to understand what do the people really need, right? And do the simplest implementation that helps teams accelerate. They use wordly mapping as well. So I mentioned wordly mapping before. I won't go into the details, or if you want, you can we can talk about it during the questions. But essentially, just sort of mapping their applications and services into this wordly mapping to understand, okay, which ones are more in the product stage or more of a commodity stage, so that we can also understand what kind of teams do we need. Do we need more platform services? Do we need to still have more streamlined teams because we're doing a lot of product discovery, etc. and essentially having a lot more clarity on, okay, what is the purpose of different teams we have. They introduced the data enabling team. They had now the platform team, no longer services team, and so on. So it basically provides a lot of clarity around where are we, how are teams interacting, what do they need to do together to solve the challenges we have. And again, this doesn't mean that they are now in a perfect state. And it's part of the reason why I like this example is that they continue to evolve, right? And if we ask them today, probably they've already evolved from what you find on the website. And so, yeah, just a summary. These are the concepts they use from Team Topologies, the ideas, and also the combination with Wordly mapping, and the results. Some of the kind of the key things that helped them was, product management now had much better ways. First of all, to understand which teams are responsible for which services and applications, so they don't have to run around multiple teams to figure out who needs to change what. Effective communications within the team interaction types, especially during the pandemic, was quite helpful for them. And they start having teams that are more self-sufficient, more responsive, and not just waiting for requests from the product managers, because they start having more end-to-end responsibility. So Paul and Andy shared this with us, so thanks to them. I should say that you can find these examples on teamtopologies.com/examples, or if you look for industry examples. So to summarize briefly, so we can have a bit of time for questions, what we're looking at was, okay, we started by defining business agility as the ability to respond rapidly to changing external or internal conditions. And when we say rapidly, we mean ideally in hours, right? And this requires situational awareness, clarity of business purpose, good technical practices, and localized decisions, basically meaning we have teams with end-to-end responsibility who can make the best decisions for their services based on what customers and the business needs, right? So a lot of things that we need to have in place or think about to improve our business agility, even though it sounds quite simple that we can make changes in a matter of hours, but actually we need a lot of things in place. We saw the need to have a strong focus on user needs and user experience, understand the cost viability of our service, having clear mission for our teams. And Team Topologies helps with these things and achieving better or improved business agility and technical agility. I think in different ways. First, encourages decoupling of business concepts, because like I said, if we want to align teams to a stream of value to customers, we need to start by decoupling concepts, right, to make the organization more responsive. We need patterns that help turn blocking compliance checks, so those blocking dependencies, into self-service, flow-aligned API-driven checks, ideally. Team Topologies is also helping in this kind of sense-making approach to help organizations gain situational awareness and therefore agility. So effectively having ways to detect when we're going in the wrong direction, basically when we're not focusing really on the user needs, when we might have teams that they might even be very effective building a lot of features, but we're not actually gaining any value because we're building the wrong stuff. I think Team Topologies finally helps us focus more on the core mission of each team, because we're aligned to a stream or flow of value, and so we have a clear mission, and it helps us reduce cognitive load on teams by pushing things that are distractions into platform type of approaches, and having also enabling teams help us acquire whatever skills we are lacking. And finally, just free resources on the website. Again, teamtopologies.com. slash examples, you'll find the industry examples I talked about. We have some infographics that are really good at just providing very high level perspective on what is team topologies. If you need to explain to other people, or you just want to share kind of the key points. And we have an online academy with video-based training, which we keep growing. We actually are soon to publish a course on enabling teams, but we already have other content. This is basically where we publish kind of our new thinking, or what we learned in our experience after publishing the book, right? That's the best place. And there's a code Kanban15 for your meetup if you want to have a 15% discount. And that's it. I hope it wasn't too long. I can stay around for some questions.
Oh, thank you very much, Manuel. I mean, yeah, apparently you kept them focused for more than an hour. I'm just looking at the number of participants.
There's still people in the call.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much. I have some questions, but maybe also our participants have any questions to you.
Yes, I do have one.
Go, Michał.
From the very beginning. At the very beginning, you shared that what is a business agility? That is the ability to respond rapidly within an hour. What does this response is? Hours, right?
So typically, things like you have a customer saying, "I would really like to have this different way to do something." If you assess it and say, yes, this is actually a pretty good idea, let's go and make the change and get it into the actual live product or system. That's one example. Or you might see, well, competition just launched this new feature. It seems to be quite popular, and we should make sure we have something similar. So we try to do that in a matter of hours, ideally. Obviously, it depends on the size of the change, but at least this idea that if it's small enough, we can do it in a matter of hours and get it to the customers, and that then sort of unchains all the things we need to have in place, both on the technical side and also the responsibility and the team alignment size.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks, Michał. I guess Agnieszka is disciplined with her hand raised up. So,
I have a few questions, in fact. So I hope that I can ask them. So I have a question to you, Manuel. Do you have any tips for identifying value streams which teams should be organized around? I mean that, for example, what kind of questions can I ask to identify the real value stream?
Yeah, for sure. There are different techniques and different ways people do that. You have kind of the more traditional is value stream mapping. There are books about it. It comes more from the industrial domain of analyzing the actual chain in factory, what needs to happen and how can we improve. But you can apply it to a software organization as well, like see where are the dependencies, where is time, where are people waiting for others, etc. So effectively you're analyzing the stream of all the activities that need to happen between let's say a change request or something you want to implement until it's available to customers. But I think more fundamentally you need or you can use some techniques from domain-driven design, for example. Like I mentioned, is really good at bringing together also business people and technical people and line them and say, well, actually, what is our business? What are the different things we offer, which effectively are different value streams, right? And we actually have one of the courses in our academies about independent value streams. That's exactly some techniques combining the ideas of team topologies with some ideas from domain-driven design to actually identify those streams. So you can analyze your existing systems and the way, the workflows in those systems to actually look at, okay, what are the different value streams. And then finally, I'm looking here, there's a book from John Smart called Sooner, Safer, Happier, which also has some good tips, because John was working for a long time at Barclays Bank in the UK. And effectively what he talks about is sort of, you need a hierarchy of value streams, because in many organizations, when you look at the very high level, there are only 3 to 5 value streams. In a bank, it might be, well, I'm not an expert, but it might be, investments, it might be bank accounts, and, you need to have and credit or something like that. But in my experience, I've seen it typically at the high level organization has maybe 3, 4, 5 value streams, not more than that. But then you need to break that down into all the way until the teams, right? So like you said, to align the team to a meaningful stream of work, we need to have that sort of breakdown. Well, if we have the credit value stream, how does this break down into different value streams, and then into different products that we have? And then inside the products, we might have different streams still. And so that we get to the team level, but then you have a really nice mapping all the way from the team. We work on this product, which belongs to this value stream, which is part of a larger value stream. But yeah, it's quite, it can be quite involved if the organization never did something like that. But I think the course in the academy is also helpful to get started. Okay, and there are some free videos you can have a look.
Great. Kaya, you're next. And you're on mute. Now you're not. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
I was panicking between lowering my hand and unmuting myself. So I have a question regarding the new, maybe not so new, but another idea regarding topologies, that it's org topologies, that it's based on looking at the whole organization, not just team. But when we were working with Team Topologies theory, in our case at ING, we also looked not at just at one product, but maybe the whole department, that it's kind of like the value itself that we've discussed. And what is the difference? Can we not use the Team Topologies theory while having in mind the full organization? Is it something totally new or not so much?
No, I think Team Topologies, and what we're seeing in different organizations, that it's like fractal, right? Like kind of Russian doll, right? Inside there's another. So you replicate the same kind of patterns and ideas and building blocks across the organization. So it's interesting because part of the work that we're doing, and might eventually become another book or a new version of a new edition of this book, which is how do we apply some of these patterns, maybe not everything, because we do have like a computer engineering background, but we are starting to see, so it's not just our opinion, but we start to see, for example, even legal companies adopting some of the patterns. We're starting to see there's consulting companies that are applying the ideas of Team Topologies. There's one company in Norway that basically the whole organization, including things like marketing, sales, leadership, they all try to think of themselves or align to one of the types of teams. So they're either platform or enabling or stream aligned. So basically that's part of the work we're doing, and is looking at how does Team Topologies apply outside of engineering, basically, right? And we're seeing some initial examples, and even in healthcare, for example. And so that's quite interesting. So I can speak from that point of view, because at the end, the organization is composed of teams, right? There's the value stream part that we had the previous question. Like we need to also understand this kind of hierarchy of value streams and products and how this all kind of fits together. But then you always have teams, and I think it's most of the patterns apply more broadly than just within engineering.
Okay, I'm afraid I won't have time to ask my question. Agnieszka, your turn.
Kaya, thank you for your question, because I was really curious about your opinion on the org topologies, but I won't go deeper into this one. We are struggling within my organization to introduce this idea of team topologies, and there is the fear from teams why we need it, what will it bring to them, and the things that I see is why we need this. So I don't have like a pitch sale for them. Hey guys, this is good and this will solve us some topics. So this is one part of my question. And the second one is everyone is afraid of being a platform team. So how can I cope with this one? I saw that you are trying to address this a little bit, but how can I cope with this within my organization?
First of all, just on the org topologies, so there is some org topologies approach or something that we are not involved with, right? So I guess they like the term topologies, just to make sure that's clear. We're not involved with that at all. I was talking from the point of view of team topologies. I think it's more broadly applicable. In terms of, why team topologies and why, I guess, the types of teams, that probably what your colleagues are sort of skeptical. I mean, people in general, are, I wouldn't say reluctant, but they need time to change, right? And so if the change that's being proposed to them, well, you need to change your type of team and you need to do some other stuff that you were not doing before, obviously it tends to generate some resistance. And so two things: you can use the infographics, which is a very high level kind of just something it's easy to share for people to understand why is there this thing called team topologies. But then the most important is, okay, what are the problems you're trying to solve, at the organization's trying to solve? And I think that helps people understand, okay, why is it relevant to become more of a streamlined team, or have clear interaction modes with other teams. You need to map that to the problem that you actually have, right? So if your problem is, for example, it takes very long to make a change to this product that you're working on, let's look at why is that. And maybe you'll find there are many handovers, there are many dependencies. And so then you can introduce the idea of a streamlined team and say, if the team was able to be more like streamlined, meaning less dependencies, they would be able to reduce this lead time, which is important for the business. But it might be something else. It might be that you have, too many issues in production, or it's very slow to try out new features and see if we get traction. But you need to make that connection with the business to explain why the types of teams or interaction modes might be helpful. So just introducing the change as you're going to be this type of team is probably going to get, in some cases, to more kind of resistance. And then at the end of the day, like with anything, even with technology and new products, there is a sort of a life cycle where you should expect there will be sort of innovators, a small percentage, people who are like, oh, that sounds good. I understand why that's helpful and we want to try it. And those tend to be a small percentage. And then you have some teams that might, oh, okay, they did it and it seems to be working well for them. Why don't we try it? So kind of the early, you get to the early majority, and then there will be some teams that are sort of the late majority when things are well proven and we can see time and time again that this works. Okay, maybe now we're going to. So you sort of should expect that, because then you might need different approaches as you're dealing with the different segments, if that makes sense. And
Can I ask
answer
another one?
everything?
Yeah. I've got another one with the when we are Agnieszka asked about the value streams, and where do you find sales teams within those value streams? How do you combine tech teams with the sales within the stream?
I'm not an expert, but I would say if you can have the sales in general, like instead of having a big sales team, if you can have smaller sales teams inside the value streams, and obviously depends on the size of the organization as well, but maybe you have a sales team for each of the main value streams or something like that. But it's interesting, as the previous question was asking about, can we apply some patterns outside of engineering? Well, what if sales teams also, maybe they need some enabling teams to help multiple sales team learn about, maybe they need enabling around understanding the products better or something like that. But so at the end of the day, if they can be closer to the teams that are actually building the products or services, I think that's probably going to be more helpful than having a big sales team that sits outside, because it's often a problem of trust as well. And this is the same, I would say, for platforms. In large organizations that tend to have, well, let's have this centralized big platform. Even if the platform is great, the teams are far away. So the product teams or streamline teams don't necessarily trust the platform. And so those trust problems also happen when you have distance between teams. That's why I think in general, smaller teams that are closer to the teams building the products are more helpful, whether that's sales or more kind of technical platforms.
Okay. Manuel, thank you very much. I'm happy that also questions kept so many people here. We will publish the video, so maybe more people will refer to the sources that you shared in here. Thank you very much for explaining both concepts through, I would say, through the angle of business agility, and thank you all for participating and your active presence here.
Thank you, everyone. That's great. Bye-bye.
Thank you.